Jalen had always thought of himself as invisible. In the sprawling industrial colonies of Ira, where smoke and metal dominated the skyline, he blended easily with the crowds. He worked long hours in the factories repairing machines that no one else could, and inventing small devices that made life a little easier for the people around him. His skills were respected, quietly, but he never stood out. To the world, Jalen was just another human trying to survive on a harsh planet. Yet today, he was about to become the center of the universe. The royal announcement had arrived weeks ago, but he had never imagined it could apply to him. Every decade, the Queen chose a single human from across the colonies to serve as the royal envoy, a position of honor that carried influence, responsibility, and danger. Many had competed before him, most from prestigious families with wealth, education, and connections. Jalen had none of those advantages. He had a small workshop, a few friends, and an unshakable curiosity about how things worked. When the Queen's envoy arrived in his colony to announce the candidates, Jalen barely paid attention. He thought the selection would go to one of the wealthy heirs or brilliant scientists who had trained their whole lives for this. And yet, here he was, standing nervously among 100 other hopefuls in the massive hall of the Royal Selection Center, feeling both out of place and oddly calm. The room was enormous, with ceilings that shimmered like liquid silver and floors that reflected the light of hundreds of suspended lamps. People of every background and profession had gathered. Engineers, scholars, artists, diplomats, and even soldiers filled the space, each one hoping to catch the Queen's eye. Murmurs floated through the crowd, conversations about strategy and ambition mixing with quiet doubts. Jalen stood to the side, hands clasped behind his back, watching and listening but saying nothing. When the doors at the far end of the hall opened, a hush fell over everyone. The Queen entered, her presence immediate and commanding. She wore a robe that seemed to glow with its own light, a crown that shimmered like starlight, and eyes that seemed to see every secret thought in the room. No one moved. No one breathed too loudly. All attention was on her. Jalen felt a strange chill run down his spine. He had never seen anyone like her. He had read about the Queen in history books, seen her portraits in government buildings, but seeing her in person was entirely different. There was a power in the way she moved, in the way her gaze swept the room. It was not arrogance or cruelty. It was certainty. She knew the weight of every choice she made and the consequences of each. Then, she looked at him. It was not a casual glance. It was precise, like a beam of light cutting through the noise of the crowd. Jalen froze. His heart thumped wildly, but his body did not move. The whispers in the hall grew louder, confused, excited, skeptical. People nudged each other, eyes darting between the Queen and him. And then she spoke his name. "Jalen Eric," she said, her voice calm but carrying across the entire hall. "You will be the royal envoy." The words echoed like a shockwave. Jalen blinked, certain he had misheard. 100 faces turned to him, some shocked, some angry, some incredulous. The room erupted into a mixture of whispers and gasps. No one had expected him. No one had even thought of him. Jalen's mind raced. Why me? How could this be real? He barely had the manners, let alone the experience, to navigate court politics, diplomacy, or the complexities of interstellar negotiation. Yet, here he was, chosen above the richest, most educated, and most powerful humans in the colonies. The weight of the decision pressed on him, and for a moment he wondered if he should refuse. But the Queen's gaze held him steady, and he knew there was no turning back. From that moment, Jalen's life changed entirely. He was whisked away from his workshop and his simple life, transported to the palace aboard a sleek silver starship. As the ship lifted from the industrial plains of his home, he watched the factory shrink beneath the clouds of smoke and dust. For the first time, he felt the strange mix of exhilaration and fear that comes with stepping into the unknown. The journey to the palace gave him time to reflect. He remembered his father, who had died in the factory when Jalen was a boy, teaching him the value of persistence and ingenuity. He thought of his friends, simple folk who had never imagined a human could rise so high. He thought of the countless machines he had repaired, the small problems he had solved, and wondered if any of that had mattered enough for the Queen to notice him. By the time he arrived, the palace was a world unlike anything he had known. Towers of glass and metal reached toward the sky, walls embedded with lights that changed color with the sun, and gardens that seemed to float in midair. He was introduced to the court, a group of humans, aliens, and hybrid species, all of whom looked at him with varying degrees of curiosity, skepticism, and outright hostility. Jalen quickly realized that being chosen meant more than honor. It meant scrutiny. Every move he made, every word he spoke, was observed. Some of the court's elite sneered at his lack of pedigree. Others whispered that the Queen had been swayed by whim or favoritism. Few dared to speak openly, but the tension was palpable. The first days were overwhelming. He was given rooms, training schedules, and mentors, each more intimidating than the last. He learned etiquette, alien languages, combat techniques, and the intricacies of interstellar politics. At first, he struggled. His hands, accustomed to mechanical tools, fumbled with ceremonial objects. His voice, used to shouting over factory machines, sounded awkward in formal meetings. But he did not give up. He remembered the factory floors, where he had learned to fix broken systems, where failure was a lesson and persistence was the only path forward. He applied the same logic here. Slowly, methodically, he adapted. A small victory at a diplomatic simulation led to a better showing in a public address. A clever solution to a security challenge impressed the palace guards. The whispers in the hall began to change. Not yet admiration, but curiosity. Despite the progress, danger was never far. Some members of the court actively plotted against him, seeking to undermine his position. They tried subtle tricks, setting up situations where he could fail, feeding misinformation to see if he would falter. Jalen learned quickly that intelligence alone would not protect him. He needed awareness, strategy, and sometimes courage that went beyond logic. He also discovered unexpected allies. Some court members quietly supported him, impressed by his ingenuity and honesty. An alien diplomat, tall and silver-skinned, shared insights into the Queen's true priorities. A human scholar taught him about the subtle influence of perception in court politics. Through these alliances, Jalen realized that even in a world of suspicion and power struggles, trust and collaboration could make a difference. One evening, after a long day of lessons, simulations, and briefings, Jalen stood on a balcony overlooking the palace gardens. He could see the glowing towers of the city beyond, the stars stretching across the night sky. For a moment, he allowed himself to feel pride. Not arrogance, not superiority, but quiet pride. He had been chosen, yes, but he was also growing into the role. Every mistake, every challenge, every small success was shaping him. He knew the path ahead would be difficult. The galaxy was vast, full of wonders and dangers, and being the royal envoy meant he would face both in ways he could not yet imagine. But for the first time in his life, Jalen felt truly alive. He had stepped from the shadows of anonymity into a world that watched, judged, and expected greatness. And though the pressure was immense, he felt ready to meet it, one step at a time. As he turned to go inside, the Queen's voice echoed softly in his memory. "You will be the royal envoy." Those words had changed everything. Everyone noticed him now, yes, but Jalen knew that being noticed was only the beginning. How he responded would define not only his own fate, but perhaps the future of humanity in the galaxy. And for the first time, he was not afraid. Jalen's first weeks in the palace were a whirlwind of confusion, lessons, and subtle threats. Each morning began with rigorous training that pushed his mind and body to their limits. He learned alien languages, not just the spoken words, but the gestures, tones, and expressions that carried meaning. He studied interstellar law and diplomacy, topics so complex that even seasoned diplomats found them overwhelming. He trained in combat techniques, learning to defend himself against opponents who were faster, stronger, or more experienced. Every day he felt a mix of exhaustion, excitement, and dread. The palace itself was an enigma. Its halls seemed alive, lights shifting with subtle patterns, corridors rearranging themselves as though testing the knowledge of those who walked them. Jalen had heard rumors of the palace being designed with secret passages and hidden chambers. The idea fascinated him. He loved puzzles, and every corner of the palace seemed like a new one waiting to be solved. Yet he also knew that behind these marvels lay dangers, some natural, some political. Every corridor, every interaction could carry risk. Jalen's first encounter with the court was eye-opening. Courtiers from across the galaxy moved with an ease and confidence he could not match. Some were humans, like him, though far more refined and trained in the ways of influence. Others were aliens of every imaginable shape, size, and intelligence, some with abilities that defied his understanding. They observed him with thinly veiled contempt, curiosity, or amusement. Many whispered behind their hands, calling him the mechanic boy, mocking the idea that someone of simple origin could rise to the Queen's attention. At first, Jalen felt out of place. He stumbled over formal greetings, misused gestures, and sometimes said the wrong thing in front of the Queen's advisors. Each mistake was magnified, each misstep noted and quietly judged. He worried that the Queen had made a mistake in choosing him. Perhaps he was too ordinary, too inexperienced, too human to survive the pressures of the palace. But Jalen did not give up. He reminded himself of the workshops back home, where failure was a teacher, not a punishment. He applied the same persistence to his new environment. Every day he analyzed what he had done wrong and sought ways to improve. Slowly, his awkwardness transformed into confidence. He began to notice patterns in the palace, subtle cues from the courtiers, and the ways different species responded to authority. He listened more than he spoke, observed more than he acted, and learned that patience could be as powerful as skill. One of his first successes came unexpectedly. A communication array in the palace, used to coordinate with distant colonies, malfunctioned in the middle of a critical transmission. The technicians assigned to repair it were stumped. Unable to identify the cause, Jalen, driven by curiosity, approached the system, studying its components with a careful eye. Within hours, he identified the fault, a tiny misalignment that others had overlooked, and corrected it. The array hummed to life, and a message from a distant colony reached the Queen without delay. The room filled with murmurs. Whispers about the mechanic boy shifted to admiration. The courtiers who had doubted him now regarded him with caution. Some even smiled, not at mockery, but in recognition of skill. Jalen felt a surge of pride, but he also understood the lesson. In the palace, talent could open doors, but only respect and perseverance could keep them open. Not everyone welcomed his rising reputation. A faction within the court, led by a tall, imposing diplomat named Kess, viewed Jalen as a threat. Kess had long assumed that the royal envoy would be someone of noble birth, someone who understood politics and influence from birth. To see a human from the industrial colonies rise so quickly angered him. He began to plot subtle schemes to discredit Jalen, creating challenges designed to expose weakness or provoke mistakes. One such challenge came during a debate over resource allocation for a distant colony. The court had been divided for weeks, unable to agree on a solution. Jalen was invited to provide his input. He approached the task not with arrogance, but with careful analysis. He had studied the colony's needs, the logistics of transport, and the available resources. In a calm, clear manner, he presented a solution that addressed both efficiency and fairness. The room fell silent. Even Kess could not find a flaw in Jalen's plan. The Queen nodded approvingly, signaling that the human had indeed impressed her. Despite these small victories, Jalen knew danger still lurked. He sensed the whispered conversations when he was not present, the sly glances of courtiers who envied him, and the subtle attempts to mislead or manipulate him. One evening, he overheard two diplomats discussing a plan to frame him for a minor failure in the palace logistics system. Jalen realized that skill alone would not protect him. He needed strategy, allies, and awareness of human and alien nature. He began forming quiet alliances, seeking out those who were loyal, intelligent, and honest. An alien diplomat named Terrell, tall and silver-skinned, became his mentor in understanding the customs and expectations of the court. Terrell taught him how to read unspoken signals, how to anticipate moves in political games, and how to turn challenges into opportunities. A human scholar, Maris, shared knowledge about the Queen's history and priorities, helping Jalen understand that the selection of the royal envoy was not random. It was a calculated choice meant to challenge and strengthen the human presence. Jalen's relationships with his allies gave him strength, but they also revealed the stakes of his position. Every action had consequences, every word could be used for or against him, and every choice mattered in the delicate balance of power within the palace. He learned to act deliberately, to plan ahead, and to trust his instincts. Amid the political lessons, Jalen also discovered a different kind of challenge. The palace itself. It was filled with wonders and dangers, from gardens that floated above the ground to chambers that rearranged themselves. Secret passages allowed courtiers to move unseen, and hidden technologies could create illusions or traps. Jalen's curiosity drew him into these mysteries, and he began exploring the palace in ways others would never dare. He found forgotten rooms, ancient archives, and devices that hinted at the Queen's foresight and preparation. Each discovery deepened his understanding of the palace, its secrets, and the people who inhabited it. The combination of training, alliances, and exploration slowly transformed Jalen. The quiet, self-effacing engineer became a figure of competence and growing influence. Courtiers who had once mocked him began to take notice, some with grudging respect, others with concern. His reputation spread not because he sought it, but because his abilities could not be ignored. And yet Jalen never allowed pride to cloud his judgment. He remembered the lessons of his home. Humility, persistence, and dedication mattered more than fame or recognition. He treated everyone with respect, learned from each encounter, and approached problems with calm logic rather than emotion. This attitude earned him allies and diffused some of the tension, though Kess and his faction remained a constant threat. One night after another long day of lessons and exercises, Jalen sat in the palace gardens, looking up at the stars. The lights of the city below shimmered like a river of molten metal, and the distant planets hung in the sky like beacons of possibility. He felt a strange mixture of fear and excitement. He knew the challenges would only grow, that the Queen's decision to choose him was not an end but a beginning. Yet he also felt a quiet determination, a sense that he was exactly where he needed to be. In the weeks that followed, Jalen faced more trials, simulated negotiations with hostile civilizations, complex engineering challenges designed to test his creativity, and social games that tested his understanding of court etiquette. He failed sometimes, stumbled occasionally, and made mistakes. But each failure became a lesson, each mistake an opportunity to learn. Gradually, he began to outperform expectations. He solved problems that confounded experienced advisors, devised strategies that impressed the Queen, and navigated court intrigues with growing skill. The court began to change its perception. Murmurs of doubt turned to curiosity, then to cautious admiration. Jalen had not sought attention, but his abilities and determination demanded it. He was no longer the mechanic boy. He was the royal envoy, chosen by the Queen, a symbol of human potential. Even those who had opposed him could not ignore his presence. Yet Jalen knew that respect earned through skill could be fragile. He had to remain vigilant, continue learning, and adapt to challenges he could not yet imagine. The palace was a world of constant motion, where alliances shifted, secrets lingered, and the unexpected could strike at any moment. Being chosen by the Queen was a gift, but it was also a responsibility to himself, to humanity, and to the galaxy. As he walked through the palace halls, passing courtiers who now nodded in acknowledgement, Jalen felt a sense of purpose he had never known. The journey was only beginning. The world of the Queen was vast, complex, and full of unseen threats, yet for the first time in his life, he felt truly ready to face it. He had been chosen, noticed, and challenged. How he responded would shape not just his own future, but the future of all humans in the galaxy. And for Jalen, that challenge was a promise he could not refuse. The calm that had settled over the palace was shattered one morning with an urgent alarm. Red lights flashed across the grand halls, and the Queen's advisors moved with tense efficiency. A fleet of unknown alien warships had been detected approaching Vera. Sensors indicated they were far more advanced than any civilization the humans, or their allies, had ever faced. Panic spread quickly. Colonies sent distress messages, military forces readied their defenses, and the court struggled to comprehend the scale of the threat. Jalen, who had been studying interstellar treaties, felt a familiar surge of fear, but this time it was tempered by determination. The Queen called an emergency council, bringing together the most brilliant minds of the galaxy: diplomats, strategists, engineers, and warriors. Many assumed the crisis would require military expertise alone. Yet, the Queen turned to Jalen, her gaze sharp and unwavering. "You will assist me directly," she said. "Your knowledge of human ingenuity may be the key we need." Whispers rippled through the hall. Jalen, the quiet engineer from the industrial colonies, was now at the center of a galactic emergency. Some doubted his abilities, others were curious. Jalen himself felt the weight of the responsibility. Lives across multiple systems depended on decisions he had never imagined making. The first council session was intense. Military leaders argued over strategies, proposing direct confrontation, orbital bombardments, or retreat. Diplomats pushed for negotiation, but the aliens had made no communication attempts. Jalen listened carefully, absorbing information, observing patterns, and noting weaknesses and assumptions. Then, quietly, he spoke. "Their fleet is faster, their weapons more advanced," he said. "Direct attack will fail, but every system has a vulnerability, even theirs. Their communications are centralized. If we can disrupt them, even temporarily, we can create an opening." Some advisors scoffed. "A boy from the colonies thinks he can outsmart an alien armada?" one muttered under his breath. But the Queen did not dismiss him. She had chosen him for moments like this. Jalen spent the next hours analyzing the fleet's signals, studying data captured by sensors, and simulating possible disruptions. He realized that the alien ships used a single quantum network for coordination. If that network could be interfered with, even briefly, the fleet would lose cohesion. He proposed using a combination of human technology and alien adaptations from the palace's archives to generate a localized interference field. It was risky. If it failed, the fleet might retaliate immediately. But it was the only plan with a chance of success. The Queen approved, giving Jalen full access to resources. Engineers, soldiers, and diplomats worked under his direction. Jalen coordinated every step, translating complex technical knowledge into actionable instructions for the diverse team. He stayed calm even as tensions rose, knowing that his decisions could save, or cost, thousands of lives. The first attempt to implement the plan was tense. The interference devices were deployed in orbit, humming with energy. Jalen monitored the alien fleet's response from the command deck. At first, nothing happened. Then, signals began to falter. The warships shifted course erratically, their coordination collapsing. The humans and allies seized the opportunity, launching targeted countermeasures and evacuations. The success brought relief, but Jalen knew the battle was far from over. The aliens were adapting quickly. Every solution he devised was met with a new challenge, a new variable. He spent sleepless nights recalculating, testing, and innovating. At times, exhaustion made his hands shake and doubt crept into his mind. Yet each time he remembered the lessons of the factory floor. Persistence, observation, and learning from mistakes were his greatest tools. Through it all, Jalen's presence began to change the perception of humanity. Colonies that had once doubted human capability now relied on his strategies. Diplomats who had dismissed him as inexperienced now sought his advice. Even members of the court who had resented his rise acknowledged his skill, though some did so reluctantly. Humans, once underestimated, were suddenly seen as clever, adaptable, and vital to the galaxy's defense. The crisis was not only technical, but political. The alien fleet had allies among neutral systems, and some colonies feared retaliation. Jalen worked closely with diplomats, crafting messages that reassured allies, coordinated defenses, and bought critical time. He discovered that his ability to unite people, listening to their concerns, valuing their expertise, and presenting clear strategies, was as powerful as any technological advantage. In the midst of battle, Jalen faced a personal test. One of the alien ships, larger and more powerful than the others, broke through the defenses and targeted the palace directly. Panic swept through the halls. Military leaders debated counterattacks, but Jalen noticed a pattern in the ship's movements, a subtle flaw in its trajectory that could be exploited. He devised a daring plan to lure the ship into a gravitational anomaly near Veyra's orbit, using carefully calculated propulsion bursts. The execution was tense. As the ship entered the anomaly, its systems strained, and its weapons misfired. The fleet, disorganized and vulnerable, could be engaged with precision strikes. The Queen watched silently as the plan unfolded, her eyes reflecting a mixture of relief and pride. The palace held, the civilians were safe, and the human-led strategy had turned the tide. Even in the aftermath, Jalen knew the danger was not gone. The aliens were still a threat, and their technology was far beyond what humans fully understood. But the battle had proven something critical. Human ingenuity, courage, and adaptability could stand against overwhelming odds. Jalen had become more than an engineer or a court novice. He was a leader, a strategist, and a symbol of human potential. The Queen called a council after the battle. Representatives from across the galaxy attended, eager to understand the human contribution. But the Queen spoke of Jalen's courage, his insight, and his determination. She explained that his selection had been deliberate, that she had seen in him qualities that transcended training or privilege. Jalen listened quietly as the words sank in, aware that recognition, while important, was secondary to the responsibilities he carried. The court, once skeptical, now regarded him with respect. Allies and even former critics approached him, seeking guidance, sharing intelligence, or simply acknowledging his contributions. The transformation in perception was extraordinary. Humans had been underestimated for centuries. Yet now, through one quiet engineer, they were recognized as vital players in the galaxy's affairs. Jalen himself remained humble. He credited the success to teamwork, to observation, and to applying lessons learned from years of simple work in factories and workshops. Yet he could not deny the quiet satisfaction that came from knowing he had made a difference. The stakes had been higher than anything he had imagined, and he had risen to meet them. In the days that followed, Jalen continued to refine the defenses of Veyra and its colonies. He introduced innovations to fleet coordination, planetary defense systems, and communication networks. He worked tirelessly, guided by curiosity, responsibility, and the knowledge that failure was not an option. His strategies were tested in smaller skirmishes and supply missions, each one a chance to apply lessons from the larger crisis. Even in moments of exhaustion, he reflected on how far he had come. From a quiet, unnoticed engineer in an industrial colony, he had risen to influence the fate of entire systems. The palace, the court, and the galaxy itself were watching. Every choice mattered, every action had consequences, and every success built the foundation for future challenges. Jalen also learned to navigate the subtleties of court politics under extreme pressure. Allies emerged in unexpected places. An alien commander who had initially doubted him, a human diplomat who had once dismissed his ideas, and even Kess, whose respect had been earned grudgingly through witnessing Jalen's ingenuity in action. These relationships proved crucial, providing intelligence, support, and guidance that allowed him to anticipate the enemy's moves and respond effectively. Through the crisis, Jalen discovered something more profound than strategy or engineering. He realized that humanity itself was stronger than it appeared. Curiosity, creativity, resilience, and the ability to unite across differences. These were the traits that had carried humans from colony to colony, world to world. In Jalen, the galaxy saw not just a person, but a representation of the human spirit. Inventive, courageous, and unwilling to surrender even when the odds seemed insurmountable. The alien fleet eventually withdrew after suffering significant setbacks, leaving behind a shaken but intact galaxy. Colonies repaired their defenses, fleets reorganized, and humans celebrated a new reputation among other species. Jalen stood quietly in the command room, exhausted but proud. The Queen approached him, her expression a mixture of approval and something deeper, recognition of the burden he had carried and the skill with which he had borne it. "You have proven yourself," she said simply, placing a hand lightly on his shoulder. "Not just as an envoy, but as a symbol of what humans can achieve. Never forget that." Jalen nodded, feeling the weight and truth of her words. The crisis had ended, but its lessons were permanent. Strategy, courage, and ingenuity mattered more than rank or birth. Humanity, underestimated for so long, had earned a new place in the galaxy, and he, a quiet engineer once unnoticed, had become the proof. Even as celebrations began, Jalen remained vigilant. He knew the galaxy was vast, full of wonders, threats, and challenges yet unseen. But for the first time he felt a quiet confidence, a sense that humans, guided by intelligence, courage, and cooperation, could rise to meet anything. The Queen had picked him, yes, but the galaxy had also noticed, and Jalen understood that being noticed was not the end. It was the beginning. The galaxy did not return to normal after the alien fleet withdrew. Too much had changed. Systems that once ignored human voices now requested human advisors. Councils that had dismissed humanity as weak or secondary now reviewed records of Jalen's strategies with serious respect. The Palace of Vera, once a place of quiet power, became the center of constant activity. Messages arrived every hour. Delegations lined the gates. The Queen's court was fuller than it had ever been. At the center of all this stood Jalen. He did not seek attention, but attention followed him everywhere. Courtiers stepped aside when he passed. Commanders waited for his opinion before speaking. Diplomats watched his expressions carefully, trying to understand his thoughts before negotiations even began. The same people who once whispered doubts now spoke his name with caution and admiration. Jalen felt the weight of it all more than the pride. In private moments, he often returned to the quiet places of the palace. He stood on balconies overlooking the city, or walked alone through the floating gardens. The stars looked the same as they always had, distant and endless. They reminded him of who he was before the palace, before the Queen, before the war. He was still the same person who fixed broken machines and solved problems step by step. That memory kept him steady. The Queen watched him closely. She had ruled long enough to recognize the danger of praise. Power could lift someone up or crush them. One evening, she summoned Jalen not to the council chamber but to a small private room overlooking the capital. There were no guards inside, no advisors, no witnesses. "You have done what many could not," the Queen said. "You have changed how the galaxy sees humanity." Jalen lowered his head slightly. "I only solved problems that needed solving." The Queen smiled. "That is exactly why you succeeded," she explained what would come next. The alien threat was not gone forever. Other powers had taken note of the conflict. Some would seek alliance. Others would test humanity's strength. The royal envoy would no longer be a symbolic role. It would become permanent, influential, and dangerous. And she wanted Jalen to shape it. The announcement was made days later. Across human colonies and allied systems, the Queen declared a new council focused on interstellar cooperation and defense. Humans would no longer stand on the edges of galactic politics. They would stand at the table. Jalen was named the first High Envoy, responsible not only for diplomacy, but for guiding humanity's role in the wider galaxy. The reaction was immediate. Human colonies erupted in celebration. For the first time in generations, they felt seen. Children in industrial zones watched broadcasts of Jalen speaking calmly beside the Queen. Workers paused their shifts to listen. Engineers, pilots, and farmers saw someone like them standing at the center of galactic power. Not everyone was pleased. Some factions feared human influence. Others resented how quickly perceptions had changed. A few attempted quiet resistance, spreading rumors, challenging decisions, testing boundaries. But they found Jalen difficult to undermine. He did not rule through force or fear. He listened, he explained. He adjusted when needed, and when pressure came, he did not bend in panic. One critical test came when a neutral system accused humans of using the recent war to expand influence unfairly. The situation threatened to fracture new alliances. Many expected Jalen to respond with authority or defense. Instead, he requested an open assembly. He spoke simply. He admitted humanity's fear during the war. He acknowledged mistakes. He explained the choices made not as victories, but as survival. He invited other systems to share responsibility rather than blame. The tension eased. What could have become a major conflict ended in cooperation. The galaxy noticed. Within the palace, even long-standing rivals changed their tone. Kess, one of Jalen's strongest critics, approached him after a council meeting. "I was wrong," Kess said, stiff but sincere. "Not about power, about what it looks like." Jalen nodded. He did not need apologies. Progress mattered more. As months passed, the pace of crisis slowed. Defensive systems improved. Communication networks strengthened. Trade routes reopened. Humans began working alongside other species, not as helpers, but as partners. The Queen's decision echoed across every system touched by human hands. Yet Jalen never forgot the cost. He visited memorials built for those lost during the conflict. He listened to survivors. He kept records of failures as carefully as successes. He believed memory was a form of responsibility. Power without reflection was dangerous. One night, during a rare moment of quiet, Jalen returned to the workshop the palace had built for him. It was filled with tools, half-finished devices, and old parts he collected from across systems. This was where he felt most at home, not in council chambers, not in ceremonies, but among things that could be fixed. As he worked, he thought about the Queen's original choice, about the moment she had spoken his name in that vast hall. He finally understood why she had chosen him. Not because he was perfect. Not because he was powerful, but because he treated every system, mechanical or political, as something that could be improved without being dominated. The Queen visited him there once, unannounced. She watched him work in silence for a long moment. "You could have ruled," she said. "Some expected it. I don't want to rule," Jalen replied. "I want things to work." The Queen nodded. "That is why your legacy will last longer than any throne." As years passed, the title of Royal Envoy became something new. Future envoys would be trained, prepared, and chosen carefully. But Jalen's name remained the standard. His methods were studied, his decisions debated. His calm became legendary. He eventually stepped back from constant leadership, training others, advising quietly choosing when to speak and when to listen. Humanity no longer needed one symbol. It had become a force defined by cooperation, adaptability, and quiet strength. And sometimes when new envoys asked him what it felt like to be chosen by the Queen, Jalen would smile faintly. It felt terrifying, he would say, and then it felt necessary. The galaxy moved on, as it always did. New threats emerged. New alliances formed. But something fundamental had shifted. Humans were no longer underestimated. They were expected to think, to adapt, to endure. All because one quiet engineer had been noticed, and because, when the Queen picked him, he proved that being chosen was not about standing above others, but about lifting an entire species with you.